Most people go through their entire day mildly dehydrated and have no idea, not severely dehydrated, not thirsty in any obvious way, just running at a fluid deficit that is small enough to feel almost normal, but large enough to measurably impair how the brain works, how clearly you think, how well you remember things, and how much energy you feel like you have. The threshold where cognitive performance starts to decline is a fluid loss of just 1 to 2% of body weight. For a person weighing 70 kilograms, that is 700 milliliters to 1.5 liters of water, an amount that can be lost through breathing, sweating, and normal bodily functions over just a few hours of a regular day. Without any physical exertion, without heat, without anything unusual happening at all. And here is the part that changes how most people think about this. Thirst, the signal your body uses to tell you to drink, does not activate at 1% dehydration. It activates somewhere between 1 and 2% in most people, which means by the time you feel thirsty, the cognitive impairment has already started. You are not waiting for thirst to tell you something is wrong. Thirst arrives after something has already gone wrong. This is not a minor inconvenience. The research on what even mild dehydration does to the brain is more significant than most people expect. And once you understand the mechanism, the way you think about daily hydration changes completely. To understand why water affects the brain so directly, you need to understand what the brain actually is. Physically, the human brain is approximately 73 to 75% water by weight. This is not background information. It is the reason that fluid availability directly governs how well the brain functions. Water in the brain serves several simultaneous roles. It is the primary medium through which neurons communicate. Electrical signals in the brain travel through fluid, and the conductivity of that fluid depends on its composition and volume. It regulates the temperature of neural tissue, which is metabolically extremely active and generates significant heat during normal operation. It is a component of cerebrospinal fluid, which cushions the brain within the skull and removes metabolic waste products from neural tissue, and it maintains the intracellular volume of neurons themselves. Brain cells that are insufficiently hydrated physically shrink, which affects their function. When fluid availability drops below optimal levels, all of these systems are affected simultaneously. Neural conductivity decreases, temperature regulation becomes less efficient, cerebrospinal fluid volume drops, and neurons begin to function below their optimal capacity. The brain does not shut down at mild dehydration, but it does slow down, and the slowing is measurable. The research on dehydration and cognitive performance has been remarkably consistent over the past 2 decades. A study published in the British Journal of Nutrition tested cognitive performance in young healthy adults at 1% dehydration, an amount so small that none of the participants reported feeling thirsty. The tasks included working memory tests, attention tasks, and psychomotor speed assessments. Across all 3 categories, performance was measurably lower compared to the fully hydrated condition. The impairments were not dramatic in absolute terms. These were not people who couldn't function, but they were statistically significant and consistent. A separate study at the University of Connecticut tested women at a dehydration level of approximately 1.36%, still less than 1.5%. The findings included significantly increased perception of task difficulty, impaired mood, greater fatigue, and reduced concentration. The participants described the tasks as harder. They felt more tired. Their mood was worse. Their concentration was lower, all from a level of dehydration that produced no sensation of thirst in most of them. A 2018 meta-analysis reviewed 33 individual studies on dehydration and cognition. The conclusion was that even mild to moderate dehydration, 1 to 3% of body weight, consistently impaired attention, executive function, and psychomotor speed. The effects were largest in tasks requiring sustained attention over time. This is the kind of cognitive impairment that looks from the inside, like mental fatigue, lack of motivation, difficulty concentrating, or general cognitive sluggishness, not like dehydration, because dehydration at this level does not feel like dehydration. It feels like being tired or distracted or slightly off, the generic experience of not quite being at your best. And most people attribute that feeling to not sleeping enough, to stress, to having a lot on their mind. The connection to fluid intake almost never comes up. Here is the mechanism that explains why dehydration specifically impairs attention and working memory before it impairs other functions. The prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for sustained attention, working memory, decision-making, and the suppression of irrelevant information, is among the most metabolically demanding regions in the brain. It requires continuous, reliable supply of glucose and oxygen, both of which are delivered through blood, and blood volume is directly tied to hydration status. When you are mildly dehydrated, blood volume decreases slightly. The cardiovascular system compensates by increasing heart rate to maintain circulation. But the delivery of glucose and oxygen to high-demand regions like the prefrontal cortex becomes less efficient. The brain is still supplied. The body prioritizes neural function. But the margin of efficiency narrows. The result is that the prefrontal cortex begins to underperform before other brain regions. Sustained attention, the ability to hold focus on a demanding task for an extended period, drops first. Working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information in mind in real time, drops alongside it. Decision-making quality decreases. The suppression of distracting thoughts becomes harder. These are precisely the cognitive functions that most people associate with mental performance. And they are precisely the ones most sensitive to the early stages of dehydration. There is also a direct effect on mood. Dehydration activates a mild physiological stress response. Cortisol rises slightly. The sympathetic nervous system tone increases slightly. This is why mildly dehydrated people consistently report feeling more irritable, more anxious, and more fatigued in research settings. The mood effects are not secondary to the cognitive effects. They are parallel physiological responses to the same fluid deficit. The hunger-thirst confusion is one of the more clinically significant and consistently underappreciated phenomena in basic physiology. The hypothalamus, the brain region that regulates both hunger and thirst, processes these signals through overlapping neural circuitry. The signals are distinct at the physiological level, but at the level of conscious experience, they produce sensations that are similar enough that the brain frequently misinterprets one as the other. In research settings, a significant percentage of participants who report feeling hungry when tested respond to water consumption by experiencing the sensation resolve. They were thirsty. They experienced it as hunger. They ate. The fluid deficit remained. This matters for two reasons. First, it means that a significant portion of between-meal eating, the reaching for a snack when not genuinely hungry, may be driven by mild dehydration rather than caloric need. Second, it means that a person trying to understand why they feel fatigued, unfocused, or irritable in the afternoon may be looking in the wrong place. The explanation is in the fluid column, not the food or the sleep or the stress. A simple way to test this in practice is to drink a full glass of water when hunger or fatigue appears unexpectedly, especially in the afternoon when dehydration tends to accumulate across the day. If the sensation resolves within 10 to 15 minutes, the signal was thirst, not hunger. This does not work every time, but it is often correct often enough to be worth trying consistently. There are several specific physiological reasons why dehydration tends to accumulate through the day rather than distributing evenly. In the morning, after 6 to 8 hours of sleep during which no fluid was consumed, most people are already in a mild deficit. Breathing alone loses approximately 300 to 400 milliliters of water overnight. If the first fluid consumed in the morning is coffee, a mild diuretic, the morning deficit is not fully addressed and may increase slightly. Through the morning, fluid is lost continuously through breathing, minor sweating, and urination. If fluid intake does not keep pace, the deficit grows slowly. By the mid-morning, a person who had nothing to drink since waking may be approaching 1% dehydration. Still below the threshold of obvious thirst, but at the threshold of measurable cognitive impairment. By early afternoon, when most people report the familiar afternoon energy dip, The combination of the post-lunch metabolic shift, the natural circadian dip in alertness, and the accumulated dehydration of the day creates a cumulative effect that feels like fatigue. Coffee is usually the response. Coffee addresses the alertness part of the equation temporarily. It does not address the fluid deficit. The afternoon reaches of the day, 2 to 4 o'clock, are when dehydration is typically at its peak for people who do not consciously monitor their fluid intake. This is also when cognitive performance tends to be lowest, when impulsive decisions are most likely, and when cravings for sugar and caffeine are strongest. The causal arrow in this sequence is not fully explained by dehydration alone, but dehydration is a consistent contributor that is easy to address and almost never specifically identified as a factor by the people experiencing it. Here is what the research supports practically. The general guideline of 8 glasses of water per day is a useful approximation for average conditions, but it does not account for individual variation in body size, activity level, climate, or the hydrating contribution of food. A better heuristic, supported by the physiology, is to use urine color as a real-time indicator. Pale yellow indicates adequate hydration. Dark yellow indicates a deficit. Colorless indicates overhydration, which is less common but also not optimal. Starting the day with water before anything else addresses the overnight deficit before it compounds. This does not need to be a large amount. 300 to 500 milliliters is sufficient for most people. It replaces what was lost overnight and begins the day from a closer to neutral baseline. Distributing fluid intake through the day is more effective than consuming large amounts at once. The kidneys process approximately 800 to 1,000 milliliters per hour under normal conditions. Drinking more than this at once results in a significant portion being excreted before it can hydrate tissues. Smaller amounts more frequently, a glass every hour or so, maintains hydration more efficiently than 2 large glasses twice a day. Food contributes to hydration in ways that most people underestimate. Fruits and vegetables are typically 80 to 90% water by weight. Cucumbers, celery, tomatoes, watermelon. These are not just food, they are sources of fluid that comes packaged with electrolytes and is absorbed at a different rate than plain water. People who eat a diet rich in whole fruits and vegetables have meaningfully higher baseline hydration levels than people eating primarily processed food, independent of how much water they drink. Electrolytes matter for hydration in a way that is often simplified into products and protocols that overcomplicate the actual biochemistry. Sodium is the primary electrolyte governing how water is distributed in the body and how effectively hydration is maintained in cells. The kidneys regulate sodium balance continuously. For most people in normal conditions, dietary sodium from food is sufficient to support normal hydration. The cases where additional electrolytes genuinely improve hydration are primarily those involving prolonged physical exertion, heavy sweating, or illness with fluid loss. The one context where plain water is genuinely suboptimal for hydration is extended exercise in heat, where sweat losses are high and sodium losses are significant. In this context, a small amount of sodium added to water meaningfully improves hydration compared to plain water alone. For normal daily conditions, this is not a relevant consideration. Here is the honest framing. Dehydration at the level most people experience it every day is not dramatic. It does not produce obvious symptoms that demand attention. It produces a background reduction in cognitive performance, a mild increase in fatigue and irritability, and a subtle impairment of attention and memory that blends seamlessly into the general texture of daily life. It is precisely because it does not feel like dehydration that it goes unaddressed. It feels like a normal Tuesday. It feels like the way things are. The research says it does not have to be. Cognitive performance at adequate hydration is measurably better than at mild dehydration. Mood is more stable. Fatigue is lower. The afternoon slump is less severe. None of these differences require a dramatic intervention. They require drinking enough water consistently across the day, before thirst, not in response to it. That is the shift. Not from dehydrated to heroically hydrated, from mildly dehydrated by default to adequately hydrated by design. The brain you have been working with every day may not be the brain you actually have access to. If this changed how you think about something as simple as drinking water, hit the like button, share it with someone who runs on coffee and wonders why their afternoon is a write-off,